Some buildings hold their history the way bones hold a break, healed on the outside, fractured underneath, forever changed by what happened inside them. These are 3 of those places. 3 locations across America that have been left behind, locked up, and in some cases, barricaded. Not to keep people out, but according to those who've been inside, to keep something else in. These are their stories. Story 1. Eloise, the hospital that never stopped screaming. Wayne County, Michigan. My name is Carl. I'm a 34-year-old electrician from Dearborn, because I want to be upfront about something before I get into this. I went to Eloise as a skeptic. I've always been the guy in the group who rolls his eyes at ghost stories, who pushes open the creaky door first just to prove there's nothing behind it. I don't say this to brag. I say it so you understand that what I'm about to describe didn't come from a mind that was looking for something to be afraid of. For those who don't know, the Eloise Psychiatric Hospital Complex in Westland, Michigan is one of the most notorious abandoned sites in the entire country. At its peak, it was a self-contained city, nearly 10,000 patients, its own power plant, its own farm, its own cemetery. Over the course of its operation, which ran from the mid-1800s through the late 20th century, tens of thousands of people lived and died inside those walls. Many of them were forgotten by their families. Many were buried in the hospital's own graveyard under numbered markers instead of names. I went with 2 friends on a Friday night in late September. I won't say how we got in, but I will say the building has a way of pulling you deeper than you intended to go. The first hour was fine. Creepy in the way that all abandoned buildings are creepy. Peeling paint, collapsed ceilings, the smell of rot and standing water. The particular silence of a space that used to hold thousands of voices, and now holds none. So we had flashlights and a cheap audio recorder that my friend Marcus had brought along as a joke. We were on the 3rd floor, moving through what looked like a long patient ward, rows of doorways, each one opening into a small room barely big enough for a cot, when we all stopped at the same time. None of us said stop, we just did. The way you do when your body registers something before your brain catches up. There was a sound coming from the far end of the hallway. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I've thought about it almost every day since, and I still struggle with the words. It was not a scream. It was the sound of someone who had been screaming for a very long time and had nearly run out of the ability to do it. A thin, ragged, exhausted sound. High-pitched, rhythmic, coming at regular intervals like breathing, like someone in pain so deep and so old it had become mechanical. We stood there for what felt like 3 minutes. None of us moved. Marcus had the audio recorder running, and he didn't even remember turning it on. Then my flashlight went out. Just mine. Marcus and our other friend Deja still had theirs. Mine simply stopped. I changed the batteries the morning before we went in. I specifically remember doing that because I didn't want any issues. I checked the batteries after we got out. They were fine. The flashlight worked perfectly the second I stepped outside the building. We left. We didn't discuss it until we were in the car with the doors locked and the heat running. Marcus played back the recorder. You could hear our footsteps, our breathing, the distant drip of water somewhere. And then faint but completely unmistakable, underneath our silence, the sound. The thin rhythmic wailing, exactly as we heard it. And then on the recording, something none of us heard in the moment. A voice, close to the recorder. Close enough that whatever made it was standing near Marcus, when he had no memory of anyone being near him. The voice says clearly and without distortion, "I'm still here." Marcus deleted the file that night. He said he couldn't have it on his phone. I understand why. I also understand why I haven't slept a full 8 hours since September. Eloise is partially being redeveloped now. They're turning one of the buildings into a hotel and event space. I think about the patients buried in that numbered cemetery whenever I see the renovation updates online. I think about how many of them never had anyone come looking for them when they were alive. I think about the voice on the recorder and how after more than a century, it was still trying to be heard. Story 2. The Assignment. Carnal Abandoned School, New Mexico. I'm a photographer. Not professionally, just seriously. The kind of person who drives 3 hours for the right shot of the right building in the right light. Abandoned places are my specialty. I've photographed empty factories, collapsed farmhouses, derelict motels along Route 66. I have a good sense for these spaces. I know the difference between a building that's just dead and a building that feels wrong. The school outside Carnal felt wrong from the parking lot. It's a small adobe structure, single story out in the high desert. It closed sometime in the 70s, and before that it served a tiny rural community that has since largely scattered and disappeared. There's no fence, no signage, nothing formally preventing entry. It's just sitting there in the scrub, windows empty, front door hanging open like a mouth. I arrived around 4 in the afternoon because I wanted the low golden light for the exterior shots. I spent about 40 minutes outside, got some beautiful images of the facade, the collapsed playground equipment, the way the desert was slowly reclaiming the cracked asphalt. Then the light started dropping, and I went inside. The interior was 2 rooms, a main classroom and a smaller room that may have been a storage space or a teacher's office. The classroom still had its chalkboard on the wall, cracked down the middle, but intact. A few wooden desks were still there, shoved to the sides of the room, some broken. On the floor, scattered pages from old textbooks, the kind of imagery you dream about as an abandoned places photographer. I set up my tripod and started working. I was maybe 20 minutes into shooting the interior when I noticed that one of the desks had moved. I want to be precise. I had photographed that specific cluster of desks when I first entered the room. I was methodical about it because I always shoot the full space before I start composing. In my first set of shots, 3 desks were pushed together against the left wall. When I looked up from my tripod 20 minutes later, one of those desks was in the center of the room. Not close to the center, not slightly shifted. In the dead center of the floor, facing the chalkboard, the way a student would sit during a lesson. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the floor for drag marks. The floor was thick with dust and grit, and there were no marks between the wall and where the desk now sat. No lines, no scrapes. No evidence of anything having been pushed or pulled across it. The dust around the desk's legs was undisturbed, as if the desk had always been there. I took photographs of it. My hands were shaking enough that 2 of them blurred. Then I looked at the chalkboard. In the dust and residue on the chalkboard's surface, visible in the last low angle of the light coming through the window, there were letters. I don't know if they had been there when I entered and I'd missed them, or whether they appeared while I was in the room. I cannot tell you which option is less frightening. The letters spelled 2 words: stay seated. I did not stay seated. I took my tripod and my camera bag, and I walked out of that building at a pace that I will not dignify by calling anything other than running. I drove 40 minutes to the nearest town, sat in a diner, and ordered coffee I didn't drink for an hour. When I got home and reviewed the photographs, the desk was in both positions. In my early wide shots, against the wall with the others. In the later shots I took before I left, alone in the center of the room, facing the board. The chalkboard message is visible in 3 of the photographs. The letters are uneven, childlike, written at the height a child's hand would reach. I've been a photographer for 11 years. I've never returned to an abandoned building at night. I've never returned to that school at all. Story 3, The Mouton Mansion, St. Mary Parish, Louisiana. There is a plantation-era mansion rotting quietly in the wetlands of St. Mary Parish that locals refuse to name out loud. I'll call it the Mouton House, which is close enough to its actual name that people from the area will know exactly what I'm talking about. And far enough that I don't feel responsible for what happens if someone goes looking. The man who told me this story is named Reggie. He's in his 50s, born and raised in that parish. And he told me this at his kitchen table with the kind of flat, tired honesty that you only get from someone who has made peace with the fact that nobody is going to believe them anyway. Reggie went into the Mouton House twice. The first time was a dare when he was 17. The second time was 30 years later, and he went alone. And he says he went because he needed to confirm that what he remembered from the first time was real. The house was built in the 1840s. It passed through several families, the last of whom abandoned it in the early 1970s. Under circumstances that Reggie says the older people in town know about but don't discuss. It has been empty for over 50 years. The swamp has been pulling at it the whole time. The lower floor floods seasonally. The wraparound porch has partially collapsed into the Spanish moss and standing water. The upper stories lean slightly southward, as if the whole structure is tired and trying to lie down. The first time at 17, Reggie went in with 4 friends on a summer night. They made it as far as the grand staircase in the main hall before every single one of them stopped moving. Reggie describes it as a sudden, total certainty that there was someone else in the house. Not a feeling, a knowledge. The way you know when you walk into a room that another person is already in it. That particular shift in the air, that sense of shared occupied space. They looked up the staircase. On the landing above them at the top of the stairs, there was a woman. Reggie is very careful about how he describes her. He says she was not transparent, not glowing, not any of the things you expect from a ghost story. She looked completely solid. She was wearing dark clothing, old-fashioned, her hair pinned up. She was standing completely still, one hand resting on the banister. And she was looking down at them with an expression that Reggie says was not angry, not threatening. He searches for the word every time he tries to describe it, and the word he always lands on is proprietary. She looked at them the way a person looks at something that belongs to them. All 5 of them ran. One of Reggie's friends broke his ankle on the porch steps and didn't even stop running until he hit the road. For 30 years, Reggie told himself there was an explanation, a squatter, a trick of the light. He was 17, it was dark. The mind fills in details when it's frightened. He told himself this so many times and for so many years that he almost believed it. Then his mother got sick, and in her final weeks, she started talking about the Mouton house the way very old and very ill people sometimes talk about, things they kept quiet their whole lives. She told Reggie that the last family to live in the house had a daughter who died there in the late 1960s, a young woman in her 20s, who everyone in town knew had refused to leave the house, even as the rest of her family prepared to move. She had loved that house with a ferocity that unsettled people. When she died, unexpectedly, of causes that Reggie's mother described only as unclear, the rest of the family left within a week and never came back. After his mother passed, Reggie drove out to the Mouton house alone. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. He parked on the road and walked through the overgrowth to the porch, stepped through the collapsed section carefully, and stood in the main hall. He looked up the staircase. She was there. Same position, same hand on the banister, same expression, that quiet, total ownership. Reggie stood there for almost a full minute this time. He didn't run. He was 53 years old and he'd driven out there specifically to see her, and he wasn't going to run again. He said out loud, into the rotting dark of that hallway, that he was sorry for trespassing. That he didn't mean any disrespect. That he just needed to know she was real. He says she tilted her head slightly when he said that. Just slightly. The way a person does when they're listening. Then he turned around and walked back to his car. He told me he doesn't think she's haunting that house. He thinks she's living in it. He thinks she never left, and she never will. And the difference between those two things matters more than most people realize. The Mouton house is still standing, still sinking. Still wrapped in Spanish moss and swamp silence at the end of a road that doesn't appear on any map I've been able to find. I haven't gone looking for it. I don't think I want her looking back at me. Some places aren't abandoned at all. Some places are just waiting for the right person to walk through the door. Don't be that person. 3 abandoned places. 3 stories nobody can explain. If you made it to the end, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and press the bell so you're first to know when the next one drops. Share this with someone who thinks they don't believe in ghosts. And tell me in the comments, would you ever walk into one of these places? Because we just might go back.